Okay, so we'll get started, and I'm sure people will probably filter in and join the meeting as we get started. So I would like to welcome everyone to the Sustainability Discussion Series. Tonight we'll be talking specifically about environmental sustainability. My name is Katie, and I will be your moderator today along with Emily Mazon. Before we begin, I want to let you know that I have just entered the first question of the night into the group chat, which is at the bottom of the screen, so you can start thinking about it before we begin the conversation. This discussion series is intended to give the audience a chance to share their ideas on topics revolving around sustainability and discuss the relationship between social, economic, and environmental justice. We want each of you to come away from these discussions with a deeper understanding of not only others' perspectives, but a deeper understanding of your own. I would like to remind the audience that this discussion is being recorded and will be available on YouTube after the meeting. It is up to you if you would like to share your video. You can turn it on and off by clicking the video camera at the bottom left hand of the screen. You can also mute and unmute your microphone by clicking the microphone button. We ask that you keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking or getting ready to speak. I will prompt and guide the discussion throughout the evening by posing questions to you. Throughout the discussion, you're welcome to share your thoughts out loud through the group chat or just sit back and listen. Feel free to enter into the conversation as you would like. The moderator does not need to call on people. The first time you talk, we ask that you briefly introduce yourself and your interest in sustainability. So tonight, we would like to start off the discussion with the question of, how would you define sustainability, environmental sustainability?
I can take a stab at that. Introduce myself. I'm Mia. I've been following Kate and Emily, hoping to see your cool bike trip and planning maybe a similar type of trip with some of my friends. But I have a professor who talks about it as being able to use and enjoy what we have now without compromising the ability of people in the future to also use and enjoy those same things.
So I think oftentimes the definition of environmental sustainability is pretty much just what Mia said. It's preserving resources today so our future generations are able to use it. But that often takes a very human-centric point of view. And what I'm wondering is, do you think that a more nature-centric perspective might be beneficial, or is the human-centric perspective beneficial in terms of environmental sustainability? So should we be preserving resources for our future generations, or preserving resources to share with other species and wild spaces?
I think, don't mind the dogs barking in the background, but I think it's more effective to think of it as human-centric, because that's what at least our country is good at doing, and I find it to be more motivating for the general public.
I'm Braden, and I am interested in sustainability. I'm an environmental science major, so it's something that's always on my mind. And I think it's a pretty important thing to be conscious of and be striving for right now with everything going on in the world. But yeah, I feel like it kind of depends on how you see human relationship with nature, because if you include humans in this idea of nature and like a part of nature, then nature centric would involve humans as well. And I think that in a way you could have that intergenerational equity and give those rights to future generations while also reserving those resources for everyone, including humans and other species that may need them, including the species themselves. Yeah.
I'm Kate. I'm interested in like permaculture and sustainable farming. And I think that like if we do think of it in a human-centric way, we can still also think of it in a nature way, because like people enjoy the national parks and like nature for themselves. So I guess saving nature would like in turn be for like people.
So I guess going off of both what Kate and Braden said, I'll pose it as a more specific question. So if you could think of humans as either being completely part of nature or completely separate from nature, where do you think humans' relationship actually stands somewhere on that spectrum?
This is funny because I had like 2 classes about this week, this exact topic, but so I've been thinking about this a bit, and I think it's mostly a question of definitions, because I mean, in one sense, you can say that like everything humans do is nature because we're biological organisms, and you know, like all our thoughts come from our brain. So in a sense, you can say that there's nothing that's not nature, which I think is true, but I think it's also helpful to recognize that there are times when the things we do are significantly different than everything else that's happening in nature. And yeah, I don't know what the right role for humans is, but I think we all have a sense that maybe this isn't it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And adding on to that, it's kind of like, because humans have defined nature, in many senses we use it as this is nature and this is city or humans, or how we're interacting with nature. So I think in that way we have defined it as separate in many cases.
I think it's also interesting how in a way we're like constantly trying to separate ourselves from nature, both like physically and just like metaphorically. You know, we're constantly trying to like come up with a definition of human that encompasses everyone who we think of as human, but still separating ourselves from like other species like chimpanzees, for example. But then like physically, like, you know, we live in buildings that are air conditioned, that don't have any open like windows that can be open to the outside, and like our cities become further and further away from like untouched nature, and it's really hard to find. I think it's getting more common to see like green areas and green spaces, but for a long time, you know, many older urban areas don't have much nature a part of them.
I agree with that. I think like that we ourselves are a part of nature, but we've like chosen to like leave nature. Like humans are a part of nature, but not their surroundings.
Yeah, it's kind of like how we say this is inside and that's outside, and outside is more dangerous than inside because we've used nature to build ourselves an inside where we could be separate from nature.
I read, sorry, I read an interesting article the other day that mentioned that like we like to talk about like, oh, nature as in like those big national parks over there, and kind of separate it from ourselves, and that this is kind of harmful because it gives us a free pass to like trash our cities or like throw garbage in the sewers or whatever, and to not worry about things that are happening in nature because we can still like protect nature out there, and then we don't have to feel bad about what we do where we live because we're like, oh, but this isn't nature, this is just like my house. So like I see the difference, but also like maybe the difference is just kind of an excuse for us not to take the nature where we are seriously.
I feel like that's a really good point that I feel like we kind of forget. I forget a lot, and I think also our relationship to nature a lot depends on our philosophy or our worldview and our values. Because I'm currently in a theology class, and we're talking about the difference between Kemetic and Cartesian thinking. Kemetic is what Egypt was called before it was like colonized. But in that sense, like everything is seen as like in balance and like harmony, and like humans are much a part of nature and they can disrupt that balance. And so you have to be aware of that balance to keep that balance. Whereas like Cartesian thinking is much more of like what we would describe to as like Western, where like we try to compartmentalize things and like study them in its individualness rather than like seeing it as part of a larger system, and kind of like also creating this dualism between like this is outside, this is inside, this is nature, this is not nature. So I think that also kind of affects the way that we see nature and our role in it.
So going off of that conversation, I think it's undeniable that humans are reliant on nature. So in what ways are humans reliant on nature? And if any, what ways are humans reliant on nature? And if any, which ways is nature reliant on humans?
I think that humans are reliant on nature for like resources like agriculture resources and like just any like geological resources, stuff like that. But I can't really think of any way that nature is reliant on humans though, unless it's like a crop that doesn't grow in the right place, which is probably humans doing anyways.
Yeah, I can't think of any way humans like are an important part of any ecosystem, but I think since humans have caused so much damage, they're really the only ones who can reverse it, because we can use our knowledge and our ability to create things to actually reverse the damage we've done a little bit.
I think that like it's hard to imagine ways that nature's reliant on humans, but I think maybe part of that comes from we have this idea that like sort of before like at least in the United States, like before European colonization, like humans didn't really impact, like Native Americans didn't really impact the world. They just kind of like lived on it and didn't touch it. And that's not like really the way it happened. Like a lot of Native tribes had agriculture and had really huge ecological impacts on the land. Like a lot of the forests, and I live in South Dakota, and there are forests here, and they're healthy, but 200 years ago there were no forests because there were a lot of forest fires, or there were a lot of wildfires, and like we started putting out all the wildfires, or maybe even before that. Like I know a lot of Native American tribes also controlled wildfire, and so a lot of ecosystems depended on like human controlled wildfires to grow up and to become full ecosystems. And so you can't really say like what untouched nature is, because humans have always been impacting nature, and a lot of ecosystems like developed together with human cultures. So like if humans disappeared, yeah, like nature would go on, but it would be different. And I'm not sure, yeah, it'd be different.
That's a really good point. And thinking back to like the concept of big wilderness versus backyard wilderness, when you think of like large forests and things, it's really hard to draw the connection between how the forest wouldn't, or how humans would influence the forest by just letting it be. But I think when we're thinking about like backyard wilderness and how outside our houses, it's a lot of it is landscaping, and it just goes back to how we define what wilderness is. But if we're calling our landscaping wilderness or nature, then like say you have fruit trees. Some fruit trees are dependent on people picking them in order to grow. And I think that's really getting down into questioning the definition. But I think that's the only thing I can think of.
Related to what you just said about your backyard counting as wilderness, I guess like the reason our backyards aren't wild is because of people in the first place. But like when we choose to plant native plants and like create environments that are hospitable to birds and to insects, and I guess that's a way where some of the local wildlife and local nature might rely on you, because otherwise your backyard would just be grass if you weren't the one who chose to make that change.
So going off of what Shannon was saying before about humans being responsible for facilitating beneficial changes for the environment now, you know, after the destruction that we have done, how much do you think that humans will be able to alter the ecosystems back to the way they were? And also, do you think we should alter them back to the way they were, or alter them to some new state?
I feel like it's weird thinking about it, because like nature is such an adaptive place, you know, like regardless of what happens to it, things are going to adapt, things are going to evolve to better occupy that space and to better live and exist in that environment. So like regardless of what we do, whether we do nothing and just kind of let things spiral out of control, like we may not be able to survive it, but something else might. And I guess in that way we're still having a human centric view of it, because it's like, is there a thing called nature or a thing called Earth without humans here to inhabit it, you know, and to be here thinking about our place in it. So I feel like in some ways humans have altered our environment so much to the point that we're changing a lot of the natural processes, and those are proving to be very inhospitable to us, which is the ironic part about it. And so either way, like it's on us to fix those issues, to allow our own species to continue to live, and many others that are, you know, have acclimated and adapted to the systems that be. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
Hello, I'm George. So back to the question, like, do we think we can repair stuff? Like, so not to be solemn about it, but I feel like some things just can't be repaired to the way they originally were. Not all things, but a lot of things affected. But some things can. Like, for example, we once thought that all the damage we did to the ozone during like the 50s and 60s, especially with like the old refrigerators, we thought the ozone was irreparable. But scientists are saying now that it could fully repair itself by the 2060s. So that's one example of how we've learned from our mistakes and trying to adapt to change to better the environment. I'm not sure if the other things can be applied here, but that's just one for now.
Yeah, I think one of just the most crazy things about nature to me is how insanely resilient it is. Like, things take time, but nature can bounce back from like almost anything. And maybe some of the most important ways we heal nature are just by like stepping out and giving it a chance to do its thing, because it can do a lot without our help.
I guess kind of going off what Braden and George said, were like, are there like things that actually are unfixable, like in the Chicagoland area, it's like mainly wetlands or prairies, and like filling in the wetlands, would that, like with other soil, would that be unfixable because the soil composition is just completely changed now, and like the plants that used to grow there can't grow there anymore and stuff like that?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the attention is starting to turn, like, I mean, there's still people worried about like mitigation from like further warming and changing of the environment, of the climate. But I feel like a lot more emphasis is being on like adaptation, you know, like how are we going, like we know that it's going to change. How are we going to adapt to those changes? And I think, yeah, like what you say, like we have altered so much of the environment from like its natural space, but I feel like it's important to kind of acknowledge at this point, like, okay, a lot of damage has already been done. What can we save from being further harmed, and what can we reasonably fix? Because I feel like there's also, you know, there's other things to be aware of in terms of like sustainability, in terms of like justice, you know, like environmental justice in particular. Like, should we be prioritizing like complete repair of the environment, or should we be putting more energy and resources into helping the people that are living in those degraded environments that are bad for their health and living in unjust situations?
So Braden mentioned a little bit how our climate is changing due to global warming. So what do you guys think? How do you think climate change is going to impact our ability to fight for an environmentally sustainable future?
I think one of the effects it might have is if there's more problems that are happening at the same time, it's almost like your resources and your attention are divided versus if there wasn't climate change and it was just like destruction of habitats that was happening, then that's just one problem to focus on. But now you have 7 different things and you're trying, like, you have the same pool of money and time that you're trying to divide between more problems, and that seems like it would make them harder to solve, at least a little bit.
Yeah, this is sometimes why I wonder, like, we spend a lot of time focusing on Earth's temperature raising. And sometimes I wonder, like, if that's maybe not the right place to focus. Like, yeah, that's going to be a problem, but also, like, deforestation in the Amazon is going to be a problem, and ocean acidification is going to be a problem, and all these things are problems. And it seems like 1,000 different problems, but I think it also boils down to we just kind of think we can do what we want to the land and not really have to respect it. And so, like, yeah, climate change is making sustainability harder, but like it's the same problem. It's all just like pieces of the exact same puzzle. And so, like, we were talking about kind of human-centric thought a little while ago. So like maybe it kind of boils down to that. And if we start dealing with that, we're going to find that solving one of these solutions or these problems kind of helps us solve all the others also.
I think perhaps I'm a bit too optimistic, or I'm not sure, but I feel like humans are really good at waiting until things are like obviously bad to be like, okay, let's do something about this. So I feel like, as awful as it may be that we'd have to wait until like things start changing and people see the things that are happening right now, like I feel like every day I see more and more people talking about climate change, with like the wildfires that are happening on the West Coast, and like the 2 hurricanes that were forming in the Gulf area, and just like all of that stuff going on, and just like it seems like there's something new happening every day, and people are starting to see like the manifestation of like climate change in their own worlds and in their own lives. And so I feel like that's, at least from what I've seen, has increased the urgency, and like more and more people are like, okay, climate change is an issue, climate change is an issue. Maybe we should do something about this. So as much as I hate how much of procrastinators human beings are, naturally, I do think that like as the climate starts changing and we see more and more of these things that people attribute to climate change, that will create urgency and perhaps more action that is well deserved, and perhaps a little bit tardy, but
I agree. It's not like an all or nothing thing. So people might be like, oh, it's so bad that we shouldn't even try to fix it because it's like too like bad already. But yeah, we can't fix all the problems that we did, but there's a lot of things we can do. And if people start trying to fix environmental problems, that's probably going to like affect lots of other problems too. And then people will probably start focusing on that, and that would be good.
How do you guys think that technology, or what role do you think technology plays in combating climate change, as well as the numerous other environmental issues that we're facing between forest fires and ocean acidification, any aspect, what role do you think technology plays or will play?
Probably like a big thing with technology is renewable energy, obviously. So, like wealthy countries like investing in technology, especially in like developing countries, and also their own country would probably good to start to set like an example, and also because they should and they can. Yeah, so that's one thing.
Yeah, I feel like in one way it provides ways to help repair the things that we need to repair, still can repair, and like Nicole said, providing those alternative energy sources. But also, I feel like increasing technology and better technology also helps us just like study the environment and study the climate, and kind of helps us see where we've come from and helps us see where we're at and see where we're going.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. Sometimes I feel like there are kind of two kinds of technology when it comes to this. Like there's one kind that, like renewable energy, is like helping us move into a future where like these problems we're facing aren't going to be problems. Like if we can find clean energy, we don't have to worry about filling the atmosphere with carbon. But then there are like other technologies that are just kind of designed to like let us keep doing what we're doing, but like not feel bad about it. So like carbon capture and sequestration, like yes, it's helpful, I guess, but it also just like allows us to keep using burning fossil fuels. And so like, is that really helpful? Maybe in the short term, maybe not so much in the long term. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that like it's important to continue looking at new technologies, but I think what's more important is implementing technologies that we already have existing. That'd be a lot quicker than just waiting around for the next thing to be invented.
I guess I'll pose that as a question to you all. Do you think that currently we have the technology or the technological capabilities to fix our environmental problems?
I'm not going to say that we have the technology to fix every single environmental problem going on in the world right now, or even ones that might pop up in the future that haven't occurred yet. But it's definitely an improvement over the past several decades, even honestly the past several years than we did before. So if technology is always moving at the fast, constant rate that no one anticipates. So I feel fairly certain that if we don't have it now, we definitely will have it sometime in the near future.
I think renewable energy wise, we like if people like invested into the actual production of the technologies that we already have for it, that we would be able to solely rely on renewable energy, because like countries like Costa Rica and Iceland already have, and like they're completely renewable, like their energy supply is completely renewable energy. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, and kind of to add to Kate's point, I think we also need to, from a government standpoint, stop giving so many subsidies to the fossil fuel industry and kind of like starting to shift a lot of those subsidies and financial support more towards renewable energy and renewable energy research. But you know, that also encompasses a bunch of other issues, such as like dark money in the government, and yeah.
I think technology-wise, we're just about there. Like, it's possible. Like, we can see a reduction in greenhouse gases enough for it to be on the better end of the climate projection scales or models, but if I forgot where I was going with this. Well, for one, even if we stopped emitting CO2 right now, we'd still see, or all greenhouse gases right now, we'd still see a increase in global temperature for many years still, just based on how the climate system works. But there's also infrastructure changes that would need to be made if we truly wanted to live in a environmentally friendly world. In the sense of like, instead of cars, trains, bikes, things like that. Which trains, bikes have been invented, it's just putting them to use.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with also just like better urban planning and less urban sprawl, and more just like intentional city planning. I feel like, because I feel like a lot of the issues with like, I know like Los Angeles area and a lot of other cities is that like light rail is one of the best inventions in my opinion. I love light rail. I love Chicago, traveling in Chicago, but like there's a certain like density, like population density that you have to reach to make it feasible, economically and also just like time wise and like worth people's time. So I feel like that's also another important area, is like not only do we need the technology, but we need to like properly plan for that technology as well as actually implement the technology.
How do you think that the general populace can be encouraged to use those more sustainable technologies, whether it be renewable resources or public transportation or sustainable building design? How can we encourage people to utilize those technologies? Should it come from environmental activists, the companies, or the government, or something else?
One
I
of the
think. Sorry, you can go.
Okay. One of the classes I took was like environmental psychology, and the professor's big focus was that the way that like people who are in majors related to like the environment and the earth talk or try to get people to act sustainable, a lot of it is like, this is wrong with the environment and these are the problems we're going to have, and this is like why it's such a desperate situation, so you need to act. But she was saying a lot of the psych research that talks about behavior change shows that that's not really the most effective way to convince anyone to do anything. So I think a big part of it is maybe like working a little bit more with the people who are in fields like psychology and things like that, who know what you really need to do to convince someone to change, and like leaving the bubble of people who are more in like environmental fields.
That's a really good point. I think, so last week I talked about, how I read an article about how, because of psychology, it's actually, when you're trying to convince people to be vegetarian or vegan, it's actually better to just say, oh, it would just be easy for you to switch to soy milk or something like that, instead of saying, oh, you're hurting animals, it's so bad for the earth, and listing the reasons why you should do it, because it makes people feel like maybe you're saying they're bad people or something, and then they just get defensive. So maybe finding ways that psychology can be used to convince people to make changes.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I think from a scientific standpoint, well, scientists are known for being poor communicators. So I think there's a major gap between the science and the public. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed in both ends of the schooling. Like scientists need to become better communicators, but also the general public needs to understand the scientific process.
I guess like also like kind of going back to like the human centric thing, like if people don't really care about like the science of it, like the government can like give out subsidies or like tax reimbursements or something for stuff, because people care more about money than anything for the most part.
Yeah, I was also going to say incentives. I feel like those are very important, especially at the beginning, because I feel like you need to get enough people to do it to where the rest of people are like, oh, well, maybe I should hop on, like everybody's doing it, I need to do it too. But I watched this, I think it was a TED Talk talking about how to, it was like a power company and like trying to get people to be like use less energy or something. I can't exactly remember, but they were saying they tried all of these different ways to try to convince people to like do better and whatever that means. And they found that the most statistically significant way to get people to actually change their behavior is if you told them that their neighbor was doing better than they were. So they're like, oh, well, I have to do as good as my neighbor. And I just thought that was interesting that like we care so much about like what other people are doing because we want to feel like we are doing as much as the next person. And I think that kind of goes into like the tragedy of the commons kind of ideology of where it's like, oh, it's like I need to do as much as everybody else and not any less than anyone else, or I'm missing out on something.
How do you think that we can leverage that that thought process that people have in their care, that what they think others think of them? How can we leverage that to facilitate environmental sustainability?
I think something that's been done that's a nice example of that is there was a study about, it was hotels who were trying to get people to wash their towels not as often. So they put a little plaque in your room saying that of everyone else who stayed in room 501, 30% or whatever, like 70% of them chose to wait 3 days before washing the towels. And so when they said specifically the people in your room, you felt like you were part of that little room 501 community. And that was the way that they were able to make people not do as much laundry.
I think if it's anything like the government or anything says you have to do, then Americans will try to like not do it. But yeah. Yeah, I think I really like the examples that Braden and Teskeen had about the fun little games that you actually prefer instead of actually talking about really serious things.
how big of a community do you think you have to relate yourself to in order for it to be effective? So Teskeen was talking about that little 501 hotel room. You know, do you think it would be as effective, for example, if they talked about it on the whole hotel basis? And then in general, do you think it's better for people to be compared against their direct neighbors, their state, their nation? What do you think would be most effective in mobilizing people?
I honestly think in this instance, I feel like smaller would be better to a point. So I feel like if you're relating yourself to like the whole US, but it's not like, but there's not people you come in contact with that like meet that standard of like the average US person, you know? I feel like it's more of an intimate, and I feel like personally I would feel more inclined to do something if like a community that I'm closer with, that I can like engage with, would be doing it, and I feel like that would have more of a effect on me than like oh, the average American does this, blah blah blah.
I agree. Smaller groups are probably better, or the people around you. So with wearing masks, if like the CDC and like people in the US are all wearing masks, but then if like people in like a building you live in don't, then you'd probably be like, oh, I'm the only one wearing a mask. Or in a grocery store, you'd be like, oh, I guess it's not really a thing here. So yeah, but then if like everyone in the US does, then some people will probably start around you. So maybe, but yeah, I think the smaller group is better.
So going off of this idea of scale, where do you think the motivation for environmentally sustainable change, where should it come from? Should it be a global effort, local effort, national effort? What do you think would be the most effective in combating climate change per se?
I think a more local, or yeah, local, maybe like a local level effort would work better, because if I was, maybe I was like part of a farming community, if someone on the government level told me, well, like you can't grow corn anymore because it's hurting the earth, I'll be like, well, these people don't know about like the practices that I'm doing to try to be sustainable, and they don't know about my situation. But if it was my local government that's made up of my neighbors, I'm like, well, they know that I'm not using pesticides, and they know that I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z. And if they're still saying that it's a change I should make, then I trust them because they know the full story and the full situation.
That's a really good point. I feel like everything is better done locally because more people get involved, and I feel like the average citizen, or like layperson or whatever you want to call them, I feel like they can get more out of local engagement. But I think that it's important to have activity at every scale, especially with something like climate change, because obviously it affects everybody, and it's kind of like we're all in this. We all have a stake in it. But I definitely feel like in terms of those types of things, local is an important aspect of it. Whereas, but I still feel like national things are very important because, like, as much as I individually feel the responsibility to like curb my own, ecological footprint, I'm still aware that like even though my individual actions like matter to a certain point, I still recognize that there's still a role of the government in like regulating and holding corporations accountable for the damage that they have done as well.
In talking about global climate change, where do you think the responsibilities lie in trying to combat it between developed and developing countries?
I think that relates back to the technology question. Those who have the technology should use it.
And I think that sometimes when developed nations make a bad choice that's unsustainable, it's a developing nation that feels the side effects of that. Like those are the places who are being not always, but sometimes more affected by the changes that climate change is causing. So we should like bear the brunt of fixing the problem because we're making other people feel the effects of our decisions.
And I don't think like most underdeveloped nations really have a choice. Like they don't have the privilege to be able to be sustainable for the most part.
I think it's also difficult as Americans who have been able to reap the benefits of all of the development that we've had, that America has had. I feel like it's hard for America to judge how other developing countries are developing because, like, you know, we've had the privilege as a country to have the standard of living for quite some time now, whereas like other developing countries are looking at places like the US and it's like, that's the standard of living that I want. And for us to like have gotten here with like burning as much fossil fuels as we wanted to like then turn around and be like, oh no, you can't use all these fossil fuels, that's bad for the environment. It's kind of I don't know, I feel like that's a, I guess perhaps justice question, I'm not sure. But I guess I have a question kind of in response to Emily's response, but anyone can answer it. Even if the U.S. has the technological ability to do these things, do you think that developed nations also have the responsibility to provide those technologies and the education of those technologies or the financial support of developing nations as they develop in order to reach our standard of living, but perhaps in a more environmentally friendly way?
I think that would be ideal, but I'm not confident in something like that being able to happen.
I think like based off of the selfishness of America, the only way that that would happen is if somebody big was gonna like some like 1%er would want their name to be on that like source, like whatever technology that they give them, as long as their name is on it or something, or that they get credit for something.
I definitely think the US can't like expect developing nations or ask them to like be more sustainable even if they are being like really bad for the environment because the US could like provide like technology and things for them. So the only thing the US could do is like provide just like renewable technology
And yeah, so yeah, yeah.
So I guess I'll just ask one more question before we finish it up tonight. Do you think that developing countries should have more lax international regulations in terms of their CO2 output because they're still in the beginning phases of technological development? Or do you think they should be held to the same standards of carbon output as larger nations?
Do you mean that other nations should hold them accountable? Who would hold them accountable?
So for example, the Paris Climate Agreement, that's something that's updated every 5 years, and nations reestablish what their new goals are. And there's kind of baselines for what countries should be or are expected to do. So I guess based on the Paris Climate Agreement, should all countries be held equally accountable in terms of future emissions?
I don't think they should be equally like expected to like, you know, improve if they have a lot of pollution or like, you know, whatever standard it is. But maybe like compare the like levels of pollution and things equally in carbon, but then like compare what they should do differently based on what they can do.
I think they could only. Oh, sorry, Kate. I think they can only be held at the same level if financial support or technological support is given to allow them to still develop at, you know, a given rate, while still being able to hit that mark.
Oh, sorry. I'll mute myself.
Okay, well, it is 6 o'clock Central Time, so I think we'll leave the conversation there. I just want to say thank you guys so much for attending the discussion. We appreciate your participation, and we hope that we can see you at the next discussion. I'm going to put a link right now in the group chat. It's bit.ly/discussion reminders. If you follow that link, you can sign up for a weekly reminder of any future discussions we have. It'll come through your email. So if you want to sign up for that, we would love to have you on the email list. Otherwise, in the next 2 weeks, we'll be covering the topics of economic sustainability and social sustainability. We hope to see you at those future meetings, and have a good night.
Thank you.